Hello, hello. My name is Connor. I'm one of the Blender Club instructors at the Animation Tutor, and this video is going to be your basically like a quick start guide to get you up and running with Blender so you can not like struggle with the user interface and get into creating fun stuff. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to visit blender.org and you're going to need to download the latest version. Right now that's 4.5 LTS. So we're just click download and you're going to follow the instructions and get that going. So once you've installed Blender and you got it booted up, you'll be greeted with this little splash screen. All you need to do is just hit General to create a new file. And so immediately what you're going to see here is the default view. And so this big window here where you can see the little cube there, this is called the viewport. This is where you navigate around and look at your 3D scene. Over here on the right, you have this little list here. This is called the outliner. It shows you every single object in your scene and lets you select them and navigate around them and hide and show them. Very important. And the other really important thing here is the properties panel, which is a whole bunch of tabs doing a whole bunch of different stuff. And this is how you change most of the settings in the program. It's usually within this. And down here you have the timeline, which only matters if you're doing stuff that has a sort of animated component, but that's how you change which frame you're on and how you can like play back your animation to see what it looks like. So in order to navigate around in Blender, it's really recommended to have a keyboard that has a numpad, which is the extra keys on the right there. You can use a keyboard that is missing this, however, you're going to maybe need to rebind some keyboard shortcuts. It's also really highly recommended to have a 3-button mouse, so you can have a mouse wheel that you can click in, because that's actually how you navigate around the 3D viewport by default. So in order to move the camera around, you just click the middle mouse button, and then you can orbit around the 3D scene. If you want to move the camera, you can press Shift and middle mouse button at the same time, and you can drag and pan the camera around. And with the combination of these movements, you can pretty much move the camera wherever you want. You can zoom in and out by just scrolling, or holding Control and the middle mouse button for a bit more of a finer control. And that is the main way that you're going to be able to navigate around the 3D viewport. Now, say you want to center your view on an object, say this mouse here. If I click it to select it with the orange outline, and I hit the period key on the numpad, so that would be this key right here. Hit that, now I frame it up in the view, and I'm orbiting around this. That's very useful for resetting your camera to something of interest, because you can get the camera orbiting around a bit of a weird point, especially if you're very zoomed in. It becomes a bit troublesome to try to navigate around, so you can just reset it with that, and now you're orbiting exactly what you want. I recommend practicing around with that so you get very comfortable with it. Now, a very common thing you're going to be wanting to do is to reconfigure your user interface and open up new windows or make them bigger or smaller. To make things bigger or smaller, you can just drag on the border between them when you get that up and down arrow, and that will allow you to scale that so you can make things exactly as you like them. And if you want to open up new windows, you need to click on the corner of an interface. So right there on the corner, I get this little crosshair, and I can click and I can drag up, and it creates this little slash, which means I'm opening a new window. And now I've divided my viewport in two, so I have two viewports. And the cameras for each are independent. This is sometimes useful, but normally what you're doing is you're going up to here, where it says Object Mode. No, sorry. Here, where it says 3D Viewport. And I can change which editor I'm looking at. So maybe I want to look at the shader editor to do some shader work. Now I can have this view with the shader editor. And that's what all of these are, just pre-made arrangements of. So if I go to shading, you can see I have a viewport and the shader editor. Plus I have some extra panels over here that are sometimes useful for doing shader work. Go ahead and explore through these. You could put your outliner here. You could put the spreadsheet, which is with geometry nodes. The drivers, that's a more advanced thing. But yeah, all the editors, anything you could possibly want in the program is just available through these, and you can rearrange them however you like. So if you want to collapse areas, you just need to click on the corner and then drag to the other side so you get that little down arrow, and it says Join Areas, which will just collapse that panel back out. And if you click on the corner and you drag, you can actually split it horizontally, vertically, however you like it. You can even actually just drag that down to here, and it'll actually move it and swap it. So it's very, very configurable. It's all done just by clicking on the corners of windows to move things around. It's also worth knowing where the settings are. So those are under Edit and then Preferences at the top here. And these are all of the settings for the program in general, which are very, very useful to take a look through. Normally you won't need to touch many of these, but some that you may want to touch right now is under key map, tab for pie menu. I really like that turned on. And under spacebar action, if you find yourself accidentally playing this all the time with spacebar, you might want to switch that to tools, so when you hit it accidentally, it gives you a little tool menu instead. Now, a really important resource to know about in Blender is the online manual, which is actually integrated directly into the program. So if you're ever confused about something, a lot of the times you can actually right-click and go directly to the help page. So say, for example, I want to understand what the heck world properties is. So if I actually right-click this, I can have an option for online manual. And if I click that, it's going to open up my web browser exactly to the properties page, which is going to just explain in detail everything in here and what it does. It also has a very good search, so if I want to say, how do I make a mesh? I can search that up, and I will have all sorts of information relating to meshes. And I would really encourage you to search through this, and anytime you're unfamiliar, just like look up things and see what it says about it, because it can be a very, very useful resource. Okay, so now that you're familiar with the very fundamentals, let's learn how to manipulate things in the scene. Now, hopefully, if you're ever getting confused on what I'm pressing, I have the screencast keys on there, so hopefully you should be able to see what I'm pressing. So to select things, we can just click on them and select them. You can also do that from the outliner here. As you can see, they're linked. I can delete things with pressing X, or I can press delete. X gives you a little like warning menu before you delete it, but delete just deletes it. To create things, I can press Shift A for add. And here are all the possible things I can create, including a search box. And so we can search, for example, monkey. We can create Suzanne, the sort of test default object. In order to move items around in the scene, you can press G for grab. And you can just sort of freely manipulate it and then click to drop it where your cursor is. You can also rotate objects by pressing R and then rotating. If you want to rotate it sort of differently, press R again, and sort of a different mode of rotation, play around with it, you'll get an intuitive sense for that. If I say I don't want to actually rotate this, I can press right click instead of left click, and that'll reset what I'm doing. So if you accidentally grab something and you're like, "Oop, I didn't mean to move that," you can just right click and it'll go right back to where it was begin. To scale things up and down, you can press S for scale, and you can make it big, you can make it small, and whatever you want. So say a lot of the time you're going to want to work on the axes, right? So Blender is a Z up program. As you can see by this little gizmo, we have the Z axis is going straight up, and then Y is going off in this way, and X is going off in that way. So say we want to move Suzanne here just directly back along the Y axis here. We can press G, but we're just moving it freely. But if we want to constrain that, we can press Y. And now it's being constrained along the Y axis. Now, if you pay close attention to the bottom, very bottom of my screen, there's a whole bunch of controls and sort of descriptions of different modes you can go into. And it's very, very useful. So you can see confirm and cancel there. It actually just straight up tells you which buttons are. So you don't need to necessarily remember exactly every button. If you look at the bottom bar, it'll often tell you what you can do. So I'm going to move Suzanne over here. And that sort of constraining to an axis works for scaling as well. So I can scale Suzanne, but only in, say, let's make the flat. Let's scale them in the Z-axis. SZ, and I can squish Suzanne down. She's very flat. So we can also rotate on just one axis, which is pretty handy. So I'm going to rotate her upside down on the X-axis. Can flip her around. So those are the basics of manipulating around 3D objects. And this can be done to almost any object, such as this object over here, which is, that's not a mesh, this is a camera. And so I can rotate this. I can rotate it around, say, the Z-axis. I can move it around. I can also scale it up and down. I can even do that to this light here, which is a point light, except with this light, it has no sense of direction or scale, so those don't really do anything. But for most objects, they do have some sort of sense of scale and rotation. So you often need to look at objects in different ways because you're editing it, or you're trying to look at how it would look rendered, or you're editing lighting, all that kind of stuff. So for example, here I have Suzanne and I have a sunlight, which is just shooting a directional light this way. I can't actually see the lighting. As you can see, when I rotate the camera around, it sort of has this fake lighting. This is very, very fast to edit and work around with, but it is not appropriate for like actually lighting. So we would have to look at a different mode here. So up at the top right, you have this little toolbar here. This is everything to do with how you're viewing your scene. So you have this menu here, which shows you all the types of gizmos, which are sort of the kind of controls that tell you orientations and stuff. So if I turn this off, you can see this whole thing disappears. And if I click that on, it comes back. Over here, we have overlays. This is basically everything that appears on top of the viewport, including things like this line showing the direction of the light, and also this little crosshair right there, which is called the 3D cursor. So all of that stuff is in here. So if I turn off extras, for example, the light disappears and I'm just looking at meshes. And I can go back in here and I can turn that on. We can see the light again. Over here is your X-ray mode. This is very, very useful. The shortcut is Alt-Z. As you can see, it sort of makes Suzanne a little bit opaque, but this is super useful because if I had something hiding behind something else, which is extremely common, so I'm going to make a cube, I'm going to put it behind, I can hit Alt-Z, and now I can see through to the cube. This is very, very useful when editing mesh vertices, so you can see through the object and make sure you're selecting all the way through. So next to that, we also have the viewport shading modes. So starting from the left, we have wireframe, which just shows you the wireframe. This is very fast to render, handy if you have very, very heavy scenes. We have solid preview, which is sort of a fake lighting mode that's very fast and gives you a sort of three-dimensional quality. And if you hit this little plus, it has a whole bunch of different options for changing how that looks. So I can, for example, go to matte cap, and I can click on this, and have different sort of fake lighting scenarios here that let me see the object in a little bit different way, which can be pretty handy. But usually Studio is fine for most things. Then you also have next to that, you have material preview mode. This gives you a sort of approximation of what the shading will look like when you render it, but it'll do so using a sort of fake lighting. So it's actually using this little sphere light set up to cast light onto the object to give you a preview of how it might look. But if you want to see how it actually is going to render, there's the rendered mode. And this will be heavy, but now it's actually using your 3D lights to light the object. So if I move this light around, it's actually going to change the shading of Suzanne. So those are your main modes. So mostly you're going to be editing in solid mode, and you're going to be switching to material preview or render preview to set up lights and to do shader work. So now you might be wondering how to actually like make meshes. So that's a very, very important aspect of Blender, is how to edit actual objects. So if I create let's just create a cube. Now, by default, I'm in object mode. So if I'm moving it around, it's moving the object, but I'm not actually able to change its shape in any way. And moreover, if I move it around, I can actually reset its positions by hitting Alt and then the grab, scale, or rotate. So Alt-S will reset the rotation, or the scale, which let me actually scale it so that Alt-S, I can reset that. I can also reset its rotation, and I can also reset its position. So fundamentally, I haven't actually changed the object, I've just moved it around, and I've transformed it. And you can see all the transforms in the object properties here. Here's all of my transforms. So if I move this around, you can see these values start to change. If I scale it down, if I hit N, I get this little side panel here. So if I select item, I also have the same transforms visible here. And I can actually edit these directly if I want to. I can even lock them off if I don't want to accidentally be able to move it around.